I'm Alice from the Academic Advising Office. On behalf of my office, I would like to thank you all and welcome all for joining this Academic Advising Chat and Share online workshop with us. And it is our great honor and pleasure to invite Mr. David Lee as our guest speaker today. David is currently serving as the principal lecturer at the Hong Kong U Business School. He also served as the Deputy Program Director and Admission Tutor, as well as the Master of the AMPB program, as well as the Master of Shun Hing College. So, oh, I didn't share my PowerPoint. 1 second. Yay, okay, so this one, okay. Cool. So everyone should be able to see my PowerPoint now, right? Okay. So a brief background and intro about Mr. David Lee. David is an award-winning teacher who is active in the area of ethics, fintech, law, leadership, and corporate governance. He is a UGC Teaching Award recipient, which is the highest university teaching honor in Hong Kong. And he was also the very first teacher from a business school to ever receive this teaching award. And his student is a wide range from different levels. So he teach from undergraduate, MBA, EMBA, and executive education. So as a FAA, that's why we have him with us today. He is currently taking care of around 60 UG student advisee with a very engaging and active meeting records. So today we're very happy to have David to share his experience in engaging students in a meaningful way with us. So as a brief background, David started his career at Goldman Sachs, and then he has a wide range of work experience from investment management to legal services, as well as management consulting before he joins Hong Kong U. He's still very actively engaged with the industry by advising the boards, companies, executives, and entrepreneurs, so on and so forth. David is very beloved among the students because he strives to be an impactful student by leveraging his diverse professional and educational background. So I won't read every line of the bios. I think among us today, some of you are very good friends and colleagues with David. So without further ado, I would like to pass the time to David to talk about how to craft meaningful questions, how to engage students in an active and meaningful way. So pass to you, David.
Super. Thanks, Alice, for the kind introduction. I am going to, I think some of you, I know there's at least 1 or 2 former students in the group that at least signed up. And if they'll tell you, I typically don't like to use slides, but I did put together 1 slide today. And so I'll rely on that here briefly just to kind of guide my thoughts, and maybe we'll just make it available. So the way I was thinking about today's format was to really just share some thoughts, some concepts that I use as I try to advise students. I'll maybe do that in 10 minutes or so. I've basically got a list of like 10 points. So hopefully we'll do 1 per minute. And then there were a number of questions that were pre-collected prior to the session. So maybe we'll run through a few of those, and then of course want to open it up to anybody else in the group that has questions. So would invite any questions, comments, agreement, disagreement, and learn from your experience as well. And so before I jump into kind of the prepared part of what I was going to say, maybe I'll just build on Alice's kind introduction a little bit. I probably, just because of what I do at the university, both administratively and my teaching, my advisory aspect of what I do is, I would say, probably a little bit more I don't know if the best word is active, I guess, compared to many of my colleagues. And that's not necessarily intentional, but I think that's the nature of my teaching load and then one of my administrative responsibilities. And so as Alice mentioned, I teach across a wide variety of programs at the business school. So in a typical year, across my master's degree in executive courses and undergraduate courses, I probably teach 500 to 600 students a year, give or take. Slightly, fluctuates slightly. So you can imagine, even if 10% of that student population I end up speaking with, that alone becomes pretty a significant time commitment, I guess, in terms of advising students. And then, so on top of my teaching responsibilities, I help Professor Anna Wong with one of our majors at the university, the asset management private banking major. And, we typically, I think throughout the course, we have roughly 150 to 200 students in that major. So I spend some time working with them and advising them. And then on top of that, through, I believe through the AAO, I'm assigned, roughly 10 to 20 new students every year that are assigned to me as I'm their faculty advisor in the business school. So there's another, let's say, over 4 years, another 60 to 80 students that I'm responsible for. And then lastly, in this other administrative responsibility I have, being at Shenhing College, I live with approximately 450 students. And so, and I'm, effectively responsible along with my tutorial team, for their basically well-being and their pastoral care. And so effectively every year, give or take, probably my area of responsibility when it comes to young people that are here at the university learning with us, is at least probably 1,000 students a year. And as a result of that, I spend a lot of time doing advisory work with students, typically in one-on-one situations, but sometimes in small group settings. And I'm happy to talk about small group setting counseling if people are interested in that as well. I find that can also be effective. So I think perhaps that was the reason maybe Alice asked me to speak. I was actually, and maybe if it's just a slight aside, not to embarrass Alice, I actually hired Alice many years ago to the university in a different role, in a different responsibility. And so it's always been great to interact with Alice, but I assume that since I had this relationship with her from many years ago, that maybe she wouldn't be asking me to do these kind of talks, but my assumption was mistaken. So, but no, I'm just kidding. I'm happy, always happy to help. So let me just run through my 10 kind of points that I want to run through very quickly, and then we'll just move as quickly as possible into some discussion that we can have. So I've divided my thoughts into basically two sections. One is my mindset that I have basically in general about advising or pre-meeting, and then questions I try to ask or utilize during meetings. So in terms of mindset, my basic assumption is that if a student contacts me, the student has an issue of some sort. It could be academic, it could be they want professional advice, it could be they need a recommendation, it could be a health issue, it could be something serious. Typically, and I think most of those of you on this call that teach and interact with students, generally they're not reaching out to you as a teacher or a staff member just to say, hey, the weather is nice, isn't it? Or, hey, I just want to say hi. I occasionally have students that do that. Even those students that say, hey, I just want to say hi, Mr. Lee, they oftentimes still want to ask some questions. Okay, so my basic baseline assumption is that if a student contacts me, there's some kind of issue. Now, that's really important because in every engagement that I have with a student, I just assume there's some underlying issue that they have. Now, this is important because, to my second point, roughly 1 in 4 people, according to a lot of statistics, roughly 1 in 4 people will have a mental health issue during their life. And I think this applies to our students as well. So I guess this is 1 in 4 during a lifetime. But if I was just extrapolating from that data point, and I think about interacting with, close to 1,000 students a year in some capacity, well, certainly, that probably tells me that at least some of the students I'm teaching that are in my classroom who are, or residents at my college, are dealing with mental health issues. And that has been the case. I have had to intervene directly with situations for students that I've taught, as well as students who I'm responsible for either in my major or in the college, directing them to healthcare in certain incidents or certain situations, directly hospitalizing students myself. So I find that if I assume that every time a student comes to me, they have some issue, and oftentimes, more often that could be some mental health related issue. That may not require medication, may not require hospitalization, but to have an understanding that there is clearly our students are struggling with a variety of issues, and mental health being at the foremost, I would say. And in all the discussions I've had with colleagues, particularly during COVID and post-COVID, I think we're really seeing some of the side effects of what the last few years has, the cost of the last few years on the learning experience that students have had. And so I find that it's helpful for me to have this understanding or this assumption, hey, a student will probably have some issue, potentially could be mental health. Let me just be open to that possibility. Now, though we may be assigned many students to help advise, we always focus on the one. And this is a very kind of transition mindset. So in the back of my mind, when I go home today, the reality is there's not a time when I'm not concerned about at least one of my residents in the college, for example. But when I'm juggling, responsibility of a few hundred to 1,000 potential students, I think about many in kind of a general way, but then in particular, always trying to focus on the one. What is the need of that individual student? And as a result of that, when they come into, say, my office, or like last night, I had a one-on-one chat with one of my residents in the college, and that was not a major issue. So we're just talking. It's always, even though I have, and I'm sure all of you being very busy individuals here, you have things that are going on all the time. But in that moment, we're always focusing on the one. And I find that's really important because it brings me back to, let me just be present, which is the fourth point about active listening. Some of you probably have had training or at least read about this idea of active listening and being as present as possible in the discussions that we have. How does that manifest itself? Well, so for example, if somebody's speaking to you, not thinking about other things, maintaining some level of eye contact, being an active listener, maybe potentially taking notes, a variety of things that allow you to be really engaged in the process of hearing what they're saying. And it's very difficult. And some of the questions that some of those of you, the registrants that had, was about how do we engage students who are shy or reticent to speak. What I find is, and we're going to get to the questions part here in a second, but for shy students, once you get them to open up, then you just have to listen, because you don't know when they're going to open up again. And once they feel comfortable with you, then they'll be more willing to share. And I have found in my experience, at the heart of that is really being active in my listening. So instead of, I know what they're going to say, let me just give you an answer really quick, trying to, let them talk through the issue in their mind. Because oftentimes students have these issues and these issues are in their mind, but they're typically not communicated in them vocally. And I also find that through a process of, when students go through this process of vocalizing the issues that they have, sometimes they can solve their own problems. Sometimes it provides them a structure to think through the issues that they're having. And so I think that's important as well. And that's at the heart of a lot of therapy. So for some of you that have either individually or studied or have supported people with different forms of depression, anxiety, and mental health issues, one aspect of treatment is talk therapy. And the aspect of that is allowing people to get out of their minds, out of their heads, and share the thoughts that they have. And there's something cathartic about that process. There's something cathartic about being able to structure the thoughts that you have, hear them outside of your mind, and things like that. So, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit more if people are interested. But kind of the four approaches I have when it comes to mindset relate to this listening and this assumption that people have issues. Now, if I get to the fifth, which is, I just put up on the screen, at the heart of everything I do in the classroom, outside the classroom advising, particularly if I face a difficult question or I'm not sure maybe how to advise a particular student, I then go back to this very foundational question. If the student was my child, what would I advise, say, or do? And the reason I have it compels honesty. It compels me to be honest in what I will say to that student. And this is really important for me personally, because I have found myself in particular situations where a student is going on about a particularly complicated issue of some sort. And I know that if I get involved in this, it will probably require a significant amount of time investment or emotional investment on my part. And there's always a way to, kind of exit that discussion early and say, oh, maybe you should just go talk to this person. Oh, maybe you should just say, oh, hey, come back and talk to me in a month. There's a way that you can procrastinate your engagement with the student. And whenever I find myself tempted to do that because, oh, I'm really busy, and if I get into this particular topic with this student, it's going to take a long time. I won't be able to finish this deadline project, whatever. I fall back to this basic question. If this particular student was my child, what would I be doing? And I find that has been a wonderful guiding principle in how in shaping my mindset as I kind of advise and work with students. Yesterday, I think there were 1 or 2 participants who were in a talk, in a session that I did for some university leaders related to leadership. And I talked briefly about something called authentic leadership. So for me, trying to be an authentic leader in the context of my teaching and advising role and encouraging students in my in the work that I do at the university is this question. It helps me be authentic. Right. So if I see students as if the student was my child, what would I really be doing? And then it gives me a different sense of responsibility. So those are the mindset questions. So these are kind of the 5 assumptions, so to speak, or starting points that I have that I work with as I advise students. Now, if I go into the remaining 5 points which relate to questions, for me, a lot of what I do when it comes to working with students is, so usually what will happen is, as most of you will know, student wants to have a meeting. So they email you, hey, can we chat? And either they want to meet in person, they want to have a call. So I'm always happy to chat or meet with students. That said, I never take general requests, meaning, so for example, let's use Alice as an example. If Alice says, oh, Mr. Lee, I'm in your class, can we have a meeting? I say, sure, what do you want to discuss? Right? I will always compel the student to outline in detail or to a certain level of detail, hey, what do you want to cover? Right? Now, this is helpful for 2 reasons, I find. One, it's helpful for the student because they just think, oh, I need to go talk to my teacher. But then when they get there, they're not very organized oftentimes. Right? So going through the process of compelling them to actually outline, hey, I want to discuss these 3 things. Then that gives us a structure for our meeting. And that helps them be organized. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit is sometimes maybe we don't need to meet, right? Maybe I can give them the detail and answers that they need in an email, which is probably more efficient for them. And it's certainly more time efficient for me. And so, and then that frees up time to meet with other students, perhaps. So there's this idea of setting the agenda, so to speak, when a student reaches out. Again, I'm always happy to meet. I always just ask students, hey, tell me specifically what you want to discuss. Okay. Now, when I think the biggest takeaway, I think from today's session, besides all of these 10 data points, I hope the biggest thing you maybe take away is this idea of asking specific questions. And this is really important. This was on my mind when Alice just coincidentally asked me to participate in this session about asking specific questions. The last 2 to 3 years, I've been studying a lot about mental health, reading a lot about mental health, and a lot of that was due to taking on more responsibilities where I was engaging increasingly with a lot of young people who were dealing with mental health issues. And so I spent a lot of time reading, studying, talking to therapists, etc. And one of the key things that I found that have really helped me in developing quick connections with students, particularly, a student may come into my office or your office and they may just be there for 15 minutes. So the challenge there is, how can I develop a relationship in 15 minutes where this person, this young person, is willing to share something that's on their mind, right? And if like I typically do before, if I was to ask questions like, how's it going? That's a very generic question, which will give you a very generic response. And so what I started asking students when they come in or when I run into them is, I ask them a specific question. So one I've been using a lot more is, how are you doing today? Or how are you feeling today? Because they can't give me a generic response. Now, if I was to go into one of your offices and say, hi, Alice, how's it going? Alice would say, okay. She could be doing terrible. But the natural response, because of how we've been socialized, is, I'm doing okay, even though you're not doing okay. Now, if I ask a young person, how are you feeling today? That compels them to think, and they give a more specific response, right? Now, I've seen this work. When I started doing this, the responses were immediate. And I'll give you one example. I was riding in the elevator in the college. So our building is 29 floors. And I was on the lift, and one of the residents got on, I don't know, we were maybe on floor 25 or something. And basically, we're going from 25 down to the bottom. And I asked this question, how are you feeling today? Or how are you doing today? And the student just looked at me and they said, Mr. Lee, I actually, I was just diagnosed with depression. I'm taking this medication now. It's a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure I'm going to manage myself. And they, like, literally in this like 22-second ride down the elevator, like, they completely unloaded on like all the issues that they're having. And it made me think, had I asked my generic question, hey, how's it going? I probably wouldn't have got that response. But because I got that response, now I know that the student's dealing with this issue, and then I know that they're also getting some treatment. And then subsequent to that, I've been able to engage with that student a few times, just say, hey, so how's it going? Is your treatment doing all right? And being able to ask them more specific questions. So if there's one takeaway that hopefully you just remember from today, is the importance of asking specific questions. And this doesn't just relate to our relationship between like teacher and student, or if you are involved in student advising as a non-teacher, like as an employee at the university and just working with students. That doesn't just apply in that context. It actually applies in the context of all of our relationships. So if you're really interested in improving the quality of the relationships that you have with people around you, your friends, family, loved ones, students that you advise, whatever it may be, there's a real power in asking specific questions. Okay. And I'm just going to share 2 or 3 other specific questions that I ask. So after we get through the specific issue, I usually start off with, how are you feeling today? And that usually leads into the issue that the student is dealing with. So if we're talking more and I feel like, hey, maybe there's some other issues there, I'll ask some form of this question. So what is most challenging for you at the moment? Or what is the most difficult challenge at the moment for you? Or some variation of that question. And again, if we go back to the first point about we should just assume that students have an issue, I've never asked this question and the students say nothing. Every time I've asked this question, there's always some challenge in the students that's difficult for them. And then that gives us an opportunity to engage. At the end of this, or if I'm really trying to get to know a student, maybe it's our first time meeting, and after we've maybe worked through some issues or challenges, I always like to ask a future question. And the reason for that is, if you think about kind of mental health and how that works, and if you think about our mind, we have the past, the present, the future. And typically folks who are struggling with mental health issues, let's say depression, for example, usually this separation or this connection between past, present, and future is usually not in balance. So, for example, someone who's very depressed, severely depressed, maybe even think about suicide, they're dwelling on the past quite a bit, some negative event that happened, which severely is impacting their present, and then really discounts their future, which is why they potentially contemplating doing something like harming themselves, because they don't think there's a future. And so I always like to ask a future question. It could be, hey, what are you planning for this summer? It could be, hey, after you graduate, do you know what you're going to do? Are you thinking about graduate school? I mean, some future question. The nice thing about students is there's always something in their future. Internship, employment, graduate school, whatever it may be. So I always try to ask a future question. And the reason for that is future questions are typically optimistic, right? You hope, there's a hope embedded in that question. And the last question I usually end with when the session comes to an end is, what else can I help you with? I like to end questions with, or I like to end advisory sessions, particularly that I'm doing in my office with students with this question. Is there anything I can help you with? What else can I help you with? Right. And so these are kind of the questions I typically ask. I find that when I ask specific questions, and then I ask these kind of questions where I'm thinking about their current issues and challenges, but also thinking about the future, and then letting them know that I legitimately want to try to help them. I find that allows me to kind of develop a meaningful connection in a short period of time. And as a result, students feel comfortable coming back. And now I'm at this point, I've been at the university 7 years. I will say on a weekly to bi-weekly basis, I have former students who I interact with, who reach out about different issues that they're facing, like, oh, Mr. Lee, I just got accepted to graduate school. Which school do you think I should go to between these two choices? Or this situation just happened at work. What do you think I should do? And for me, that's really one of the most rewarding aspects of the work that I do, is the opportunity to feel like that I've connected with students when they were actually studying at HKU in such a way that as they make life decisions as they move forward post their HKU life, that they still feel comfortable reaching out to me about significant life decisions. And that's super rewarding. And I think part of that comes from this idea that students, the feeling that students give. And so or students receive in the interactions that they have. And so as I wrap up kind of my formal comments, probably the last thing I'll just say is there's an American author, Maya Angelou, who was a civil rights activist and a well-known author. And she has this really great quote, and I'll just paraphrase it, about people won't remember what you say, and they probably don't remember what you do, but people will always remember how you made them feel. And that, I think, ultimately is at the heart of what we're trying to do oftentimes when we work and advise with students. So on that note, I think we're on time in terms of schedule. I wanted to just kind of run through that in the first half of today's session. And then the remaining balance of today's session, I'm happy to take any questions that people have immediately, or we can also work through the questions that people submitted in the sign-up form. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for giving this wonderful sharing. Very authentic from the bottom of the heart. We can feel it. And also very practical about how to ask questions, how to build connection in a really short period of time. So now I would like to open the floor to see if any participant have any questions that you can throw at the chat room, and then we'll tackle it one by one. And in the meantime, we can went through some of the questions that we pre-collected. Okay, we'll do it in a parallel way. So at my hand, I also have a list of questions. Having hear you saying that give and take, you're meeting around 1,000 of students, I think we're all very curious about time management, or how you manage to publish your and do your research work, as well as your teaching role, as well as like bit to pieces, like meeting students like 15, 20 minutes, like how you manage your life, please.
Yeah, so thanks for that. And I don't know if I have a good response to that, Alice, to be frank, but I generally will prioritize student advising over most other things. Now, and let me caveat that with this. So if a student reaches out, let's say I get an email from a student today. So then I go back, hey, what would you like to discuss? So they tell me. Then if I'm not sure, so based on what they say, if it seems urgent, then we find time as soon as possible. If it's something like, well, Mr. Lee, I'm thinking about applying to graduate school in 2 years from now, something like that, then I'm like, okay, hey, that's great. I'm happy to chat about that. and then we find the time that is mutually convenient. So the benefit of compelling students to explain what they want to discuss. So typically for me, at least, students are reaching out via email. So I respond via email. Hey, what do you want to tell me in detail? And we'll have a chat. And that allows me then to manage like the importance of this. And I'll tell students, but if this is more urgent, like let me know and we'll find time beforehand. And so this is kind of how that typically works. So I always try to prioritize students urgent, like there's urgent student issues. We try to prioritize that first, but part of being able to do that is understand which ones can be scheduled a little bit later. And so I think that's helpful. I think the other thing is I have a I wasn't always good at this. I'm still not good at it, but I just am very honest with myself. Like, for example, if there's a period of time where like I'm going to have a particularly heavy teaching load or administrative load because we're doing admissions or whatever it may be, then I'm just honest with myself and say, hey, I'm probably not going to be able to do much writing in the next few weeks, right? Now, and so I just try to be very honest with myself about that, and then just schedule appropriately. The third thing is, and I'm not saying that anybody has to do this, but Alice will know this because Alice used to work with me, but I am typically up pretty early. So I'm usually, it's pretty common for me to respond to emails at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. But the reason I do that is, one, I like to get a head start on the day, so to speak. And typically, I put in many days, I put in kind of almost a full days of work by lunchtime. But that, and I'm not saying anybody else should do that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everybody should get a lot of sleep. But the reason I do that is I try to clear email, for example, or different communications at certain times of the day. And so the time I do that in the morning is I try to do as early as possible in the morning. Now, there are other people who are time management gurus who say, don't look at email first thing in the morning. And I typically don't do it the first thing. It's kind of the second or third thing in the morning after I kind of take care of some other matters that I try to, like, I have a typical morning routine that I do. After I'm done with that, then I do email. Now, the reason I try to do clear email early, particularly like 5:30 or 6, is once I send those responses out, people are not responding back to me immediately. And which then gives me a few hours of uninterrupted email inbox, and I can just work on things, be it have student meetings, work on teaching preparation, try to get some writing in, whatever it is. So that's where that is. But I think at the heart of that just comes prioritization and just being honest about what I will be able to get done and not get done in a particular period of time.
Great, thank you. We got 2 questions at the chat room. I'll sort of paraphrase or combine them into one. One is from Sarah, that is, I think it's a boundary issue that as a teacher, we would like to be active and like engaging with the student. But sometimes if the student is like email you and then ghosted or disappear, whether or not you should chase them or it sounds like it becomes your responsibility to make a check that, okay, I need this student this semester. So how to balance the responsibility between the advisor and advisee. And the second question is more on the advising approach, whether or not it's a coaching approach that we just ask questions at like a sounding board and then let the student decide, or we do have our own point of view and then influence them and then maybe guiding them. So how to make a balance in between.
Yeah, those are great questions. Let me just start with the first one about like if a student basically doesn't reply to email. So I think most of us, and I don't want to assume here, but I'm assuming nobody on this call is Gen Z. I'm assuming nobody here is that young. Maybe some of you are Gen Z, I'm not sure. But the reason I say that is I was just giving a talk in May to a company, and they were, basically one of their things in this talk was related to how do we like connect with Gen Z because they're our prime customer base. And one of the things that came out in this conference that we were talking about is, a lot of Gen Z, they don't rely on email like we do, right? For example, as a form of communication. And so this idea that I think Sarah's asking here about, I email a student. So this has happened to me plenty of times where, I sent out my kind of obligatory email at the beginning of the semester. Hey, I'm your advisor. Let's meet. whatever. And then like, the response rate, if it's good, is like 60%. If it's really bad, it's like 30% or whatever. And so what perspectives? I typically take two approaches. I try to, at least. One is I always will send a follow-up at some point during the semester. So typically I just use start of the semester as one email, middle of the semester around reading week as a second. So if I haven't heard from a student, then usually reading week, around reading week, give or take, is kind of when I just send out a second mail. What I find is like half the students who don't respond the first time, they just say, well, I already get so many emails from HKU, so I missed it. And then the other half of that group who just never respond at all, yeah, they're just, you can't really do anything. So I think if you're particularly concerned, especially after, like, say, the first semester, and you find that they are, their academic performance has been low, for example, then certainly I think being more proactive in reaching out is important. I think in my particular situation, I'm a little bit lucky because most of the students who I'm assigned to, either they will at some point be in my class, or I will see them at an event, or I know somebody who knows them, kind of thing. So then, so another student that I advise. So through that, I can kind of triangulate if I really need to engage with the student or not. In the extreme, there have been situations where I've even had to talk to student parents. So I'm not saying you want to do that, and that's certainly not the most ideal, but there certainly have been a small handful of extreme situations where I've even had to talk to parents. So yeah, hopefully that answers Sarah's question. But I think if you feel like you've done your responsibility, and I feel like reaching out at least twice to a student, and if there's no response, I think, I think that's fair, to be honest. I mean, I don't think, unless you have some particular concern, I don't think you have the responsibility to, be a private investigator necessarily. And part of that is because we want to have students understand that it's their responsibility as well. For Sylvia's question, this is good. This idea of balancing between coaching and advising. And this is a real balance, because as Sylvia mentions very accurately, when you're an advisor, you're providing an opinion, and when you're coaching, you're providing a pathway, so to speak, for the person to work through to kind of get to their own conclusion. I'll be honest, partly because my professional training previous to even coming to the university has always been to be an advisor. Like, I was trained as a lawyer, so I was giving advice. I went and worked in banks. We had clients, I was giving advice. Now, when students come talk to me, or companies come talk to me, they want advice typically. And so my natural default is just to give an opinion. But I'll be the first to say that's probably incorrect, to be honest. And I've tried to be very conscious of doing that, and trying to get, let me take a step back here. And so usually, especially during COVID, I've gotten more cognizant of that, of taking a step back. And so depending on what the topic is, it will dictate if it's an advisory approach or a coaching approach. So if it's an advising approach where there's maybe something significant at stake, like their health, then I'm very much more proactive about, like, you should use. Or if I think, even if they don't realize, I think this could be an issue for them in the future. So I'm like, you really need to go to speak to your other professor to talk to them. Like, I'll be very clear about that. But for other kind of things, so I'll give you a perfect example. Recently, this is a former student who reached out. He had gotten into 2 MBA programs. He just got admitted in April, and they were both of them are very good. Both are really good, well-known universities. And so, in that situation, that's a coaching approach. So I'll say, hey, so what drew you to this school? What drives you to that school? What do you want to do in the future? And then I'm basically in that situation, just asking questions for them to find answers. And as they structure the answers, then they kind of come to an outcome. And so I think, to Sylvia's point, I think there certainly needs to be this distinction between advising and coaching. And I think for academics, we oftentimes just put the advising hat on very quickly. But I think coaching is absolutely important. But it also takes more time, to be honest. And so just understanding that. And the last thing then is, in my own practice, I try to do both, depending on the situation. What I'm going to do in the text, I'm just going to put the context for my slides. So those are 1 through 10. So if people want those, they can have them, and that we can save an email instead of having to circulate the slides.
Okay. So the checkbox is is always open for more questions. We have give and take around 15 minutes. So I'm interested in learning more about the group coaching section or the group advising section. How does it help, or like what is the difference in hosting down? Yeah, David,
Yeah,
please.
so that's a great question. So what I started doing, particularly as I noticed, like back to what you mentioned, Alice, about like time constraint, and then I was the number of students I was advising was starting to ramp up just because of different duties I was assuming. What I thought was, and then going back to a question, or actually there's I think 2 questions that were somewhat similar to this from the register, like from the registration, was basically students who are shy or uncomfortable in speaking. So I think a lot of our students, particularly year 1 students, are probably uncomfortable in one-on-one situations. It's probably very intimidating for them. And so what I try to do for year 1, semester 1 advising is the first meeting will be a group meeting. So I'll say, hey, we're going to have, 2 or 3 small group sessions. These are the times. Let me know if you can make it. And, I try to mix up the day, the time of day, etc. And I find that's helpful. And that's helpful for at least 2 or 3 reasons. One, it helps the other students meet each other. So because what I do is I make everybody introduce themselves. And so you have, let's say, like a group of 5 or 6 students who are brand new to the university. They don't really know anybody. And now they are introducing themselves. And so for all my kind of my mentees, so to speak, they're all in the same major. So they're going to see each other over the next 4 years, like regularly. And because our major is a bit smaller than probably a lot of other majors. And so this is a way for them to make relationships. So that's the first thing, it's beneficial. Second is because of what we mentioned, that students are very maybe reticent to speak, then by allowing them to be in a small group, they get more comfortable opening up. The reason for that is many of them have the same questions. So instead of me meeting with these 5 or 6 students individually at the beginning of the semester and repeating the same thing 6 times, by having a small group session, they can hear that, oh, John also has the same question. Alice also had the same question that I was thinking. And then they hear the information from me once, and it's very time efficient for everybody, right? So in terms of the circulation of information. And so, and then the third is just kind of what I mentioned, is the time. So those 3 things I find really beneficial. 1, it allows students to make connections. 2, students feel more comfortable when other students are around oftentimes, especially when they're asking the same questions. And 3, it ends up becoming much more time efficient for everybody, partly because, instead of trying to arrange 5 or 6 separate meetings and have multiple emails or links, like some of you use like different applications like Doodle or Calendly to set up meetings, but instead of going back and forth and checking, by just setting up these small group sessions, it kind of minimizes the number of the logistics. Yeah.
Okay. David, you have gave up some very useful tips about what to do. Do you have any tips on what not to do, or like to be avoid, or situation that is really sticky or challenging? Because from the collected questions, we also have some teacher that is concerned about like what should be avoid, or how to cultivate a positive mindset, or how to guide through students' learning journeys. Anything that is a no-no?
Yeah, I think I would say the biggest no-no is not listening enough. And the reality is many of us, at least partially, get paid to speak, like basically talk to people or write to people. So like if you're publishing or if you're teaching, right? So we tend to communicate and probably overly communicate. So I find part of being an active listener and really trying to engage with students is allowing them to give them as much airspace as possible to be comfortable to share. And also realizing as a result of that, they are probably not going to be very efficient at communicating what they're trying to say. so, there's been many times where I get frustrated. And I don't want to have anything that I've shared today make it seem like that I am somehow super patient and that I'm like some kind of monk or something. There are times where I certainly get impatient or frustrated, and I try to not show it. That's the point. But certainly we have to allow for our students that they're probably not going to be able to communicate effectively. As a result, we need to listen to them more and ask maybe questions that help refine so is what you're saying, is this what you're saying, am I understanding this correctly, etc. Things like that. So I think listening, being sure to listen as much as possible, I think is probably the first good practice, or basically make sure you listen. I guess that's the first one. And the second one is understanding that there could be an outcome that we advised a student. So student comes to us, asks us a question about A, and we give them our opinion, and the student takes a different approach. And respecting that, like, it's ultimately the student has the autonomy over their own life. And the ultimately students, it's a different generation, they have different concerns, different issues. And I think there could be times when we get stuck in, oh, it should be this way because this is the way I did it. And so here's a perfect example that is related to a big discussion at the university right now about the use of ChatGPT. So the use of ChatGPT really will, or just generative AI in general, will start fundamentally altering the way we think about writing, the way we think about research, the way we think about idea generation. And, I think in the past we have this, in my mind, even I still have this view of like, well, research should just be this way, or, writing should just be this way. And I think we'll have to adjust to that. And similarly, there are career outcomes that students and life outcomes that for us, of course, it should be this way in our generation or the previous generation, but for them, that assumption no longer necessarily is valid. And right now I'm in the process of grading a number of essays for a particular class, which one of the assignments is a reflection question, and where students are thinking about decision-making, times when they made poor decisions, etc. And it's really unfortunate, the frequency of students who talk about, I made a decision that I didn't want to make. I wanted to do A, but my parent told me to do B, or somebody told me to do B, so I did B, and that was not the right choice for me. I think we need to at least give the space for students to have ownership over their decisions. So I would say those are two things.
Thank you. Thank you for your very profound response. So I think if we don't have more questions, we'll wrap up our session today by showing my few slides as a wrap up. And once again, big applause and thank you so much for David's sharing.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm so grateful that so many colleagues are interested in this topic, because ultimately at the heart of the things that we're doing at the university is to be here for these young people. So if anybody wants to ever talk about this or exchange ideas or whatever, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, great. So I went through a few more slides. So first one is we have this resources for all FAA, that is a guidebook, and we also have an e-version on our website. Secondly, we have some referral links and also advising tips and resource hub and different topics ranging from major and minor, and also advising students from facing the possibility of discontinuation. Last but not least, please do help us to hear from you, to have your feedback about this event. So do scan over the QR code or through the links at the chat room to fill in this evaluation form for us. And we are always here, stand by to supporting all of the FAAs and also administrative staff when you are facing advising situation with students. So once again, thank you all for joining, and particularly thank you once again, thank you, David.